Evening, everyone, and welcome to our first Untold Stories in Tech Hiring webinar for 2023. My name is Anthea, and I head up engagement at OfferZen, and I'll be your host this evening. Before we kick off, allow yourself to go and grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, whatever is appropriate to your time zone, and settle in while we wait for a few more people to join. If you've already joined, feel free to say hello in the chat. We are just waiting for a few more people to join the webinar, and then we'll kick off. All right, it's just gone 4 after where I am, so let us jump in. If you've just joined, hi everyone, my name is Anthea and I head up engagement at OfferZen, and I'll be your host this evening for our first episode, or our first webinar in our tech hiring, our Untold Stories in Tech Hiring series. If you have just joined, please introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're dialing in from. But we're going to kick off while you all do that. So welcome again. I'll be hosting this evening, and I'm so excited that you can all join us for this conversation, which I'm really excited about. For those who don't know, or for those of you that do, OfferZen is a tech talent marketplace that was founded in sunny Cape Town, South Africa in 2016. We have since expanded into what we call Middle Earth, which is the GMT+2 time zone, spanning most of Africa through to Europe. To do what we do, our platform connects curated, actively seeking developers with exciting job opportunities at over 2,000 companies in Africa and Europe. Our marketplace helps 2,000 companies in Africa, these 2,000 companies accelerate their developer hiring. At OfferZen, we have a really strong focus on community and the importance of connection. This is one of the key reasons we run events like this, so that we can produce content that helps you connect and learn and get better at what you do, which is ultimately hiring developers. We are always excited to grow our community and network. So if you are interested in finding out more about OfferZen or our offerings, you'll be able to hit the I'm interested button in the poll that should be popping up on your screen momentarily. And we'll be able to get in touch with you, or one of our team members will get in touch with you after the event. So let me just quickly pull that up. So make sure that you indicate on the poll. Then we have listened to our community and are cutting through the noise in 2023. It is part of the reason that we have chosen our first topic of the year to focus on AI, and specifically AI and skills inferencing. And our big campaign this year will really be about how do you cut through the noise so that you can focus on what you need to do and what you do best, which is hiring developers. Our content gives you tangible takeaways that cut through the noise in developer hiring, and hopefully also helps to streamline your processes. We focus on data to provide you practical tips and insights. To support this launch of our new brand campaign, we are giving away a Zen box tonight that will be announced at the end of the webinar. I'm quite excited about the Zen box because we're also including Sony noise cancelling headphones. So if you're keen to win that, make sure that you stay until the end. What's even more exciting is that we have already locked in our March edition of Untold Stories in Tech Hiring, and we'll be chatting to Vanessa Roth, who many in the developer/tech hiring community know about. So I'm excited for that conversation to happen at the end of next month. Keep an eye out in the post-event mailer from this event for you to sign up. And also, like I said, if you're keen to win that Zen box and that Sony noise cancelling headphones, stay on until the end of the webinar. Back to tonight, though, I will be joined very shortly by Jeet to discuss bridging the human AI gap, how skills inferencing unlocks unseen high quality tech candidates. We're excited for this conversation. As I said, there's been a lot of talk around AI and its impact on how we hire, how we source developers, and also what it means for the future of talent teams. So I'm really keen on this tiniest conversation. But before we jump into tonight's talk, I just want to take you through some housekeeping rules to make sure that tonight runs smoothly. If, like me, you have attended a number of webinars over the last 2 years, you'll be familiar with this. But if this is your first time using Livestorm, this will be really good to know. First of all, we can see you, you can see us, but we can't see you. So actually the reverse. But if you drop at any time during the webinar tonight, you can join using the same link that you joined with originally. And it's the link that you received when you registered for the event. We have two interesting tabs at the bottom to your right. The first one is the questions tab, which is pretty straightforward. If you have any questions throughout the evening, you're welcome to post it in there. And we'll pose those to Jeet as we go along. And we'll also have time towards the end of the webinar for a Q&A. Finally, we have the chat tab, which some of you have already posted in saying hello and where you're dialing in from. That's fantastic. While we wait for others to join, you can also continue to do that. Take a moment to introduce yourself. Just let us know where you're dialing from, the company, and also obviously your name. So please feel free to do that. And of course, a big hello to everyone from all the corners across the world. Really excited for the conversation tonight. It's great to see that we have people from all over. South Africa, the UK. We also have some people dialing in from Amsterdam, which, as some of you will know, is where we have our European headquarters. It's really lovely to see you all joining. So thank you so much. I'm going to take this opportunity to welcome on board our speaker for this evening, Jeet. Do you mind joining me on stage? Just give him a few moments to join. There we go. Hello.
Hey, Anthea. Hi. Thank you for having me.
Nice to see you.
Nice
so
to see you
excited
too.
for the conversation this evening, and thank you so much for joining us, Jeet.
Pleasure.
We're going to jump right in. Welcome. It's really great to have you. Can you, by way of introduction, just tell us a bit about yourself? And I have a question which is based on a comment that you made last week, which is essentially why you're so bullish about AI in HR. So introduce yourself and tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the co-founder of a platform which is still in stealth at the moment, to helping people to own their own growth and development from day one. And right now, the problem that we're solving is that a lot of career development feels like an afterthought, and it's too tied to performance reviews. And because people don't see how their daily activities towards the OKRs relate to their growth, they feel like they're not developing and often leave. So we're bridging that gap. And we're also actually exploring how we can use AI to do that. So there's a lot of exciting things coming up on that side as well. And yes, I am definitely bullish about AI. And I suppose the reasons I'm bullish are is because it's a really huge opportunity to save people time. And not only that, to make the process fairer as well. You can really unlock talent pools both externally and internally that we're not seeing right now. And it's exciting because it's starting to become more accessible. So it's at our fingertips. You can now write job descriptions or at least get a start, and competencies, which is actually quite hard to do using something as simple and free as ChatGPT. Of course, it will take time to tweak and refine it and customize to your needs. But to be able to do that, we were in a coffee shop yesterday and we saw someone using ChatGPT to write emails. So you can start to write those emails as well, and then you can start to check for bias using tools on top of that are already out there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and we're starting to scratch the surface, which is why I think it will definitely transform how we do recruiting and how we do talent management.
Love that. Same, very quite excited about the impact of AI. In fact, in our own team, when I was doing some research around this, I used ChatGPT for some of the research as well. So already there's some really practical implication or use cases, but I'm really excited to later on jump into what that means for the tech recruitment community in particular. For every person that's bullish on AI, like you and its related benefits, I think there are probably 3 or more that's saying, it's taking away jobs, it's making people redundant, et cetera, generally taking us closer to the singularity. What do you say to the latter group? So the skeptics that kind of fears the impact of AI, and especially those people if they are tech recruiters.
Yeah. So I think fair enough, valid points. It's pretty new stuff and it's an unknown territory and it can be a black box. But in reality, if anything, it will make our jobs easier and tech recruiters' job easier because you can essentially use that to see it as a bit of an assistant to you. You can help craft the right messages faster. You can source the right talent faster. AI it's not general artificial intelligence. It's not yet powerful enough to make decisions on who gets hired. That's where human nuance and judgment comes in, and you still need that. So it's more that recruiters who leverage AI are more likely to replace those who don't, as opposed to AI replacing recruiters. A small example we spoke about was ChatGPT, of course, to write emails. But a slightly larger example is that you might be able to source faster based on skills someone might have or how closely they match an ideal candidate that is already in your system or in your company. So rather than having to look through, let's say, 1,000 applications manually or missing any close fit ones that are at the bottom because you're tired, you can't get to it, you can more easily now prioritize those based on best fit that you might have previously missed. And then you can use that shortlist and then add your judgment and your context of exactly what you need and what's happening in the market to make the decision. So the decisions still sit with you. It's just making your life a lot easier. There's, of course, the risks with that. I understand the hesitance that, while using that, you might miss certain candidates. And then it's just a case of how you tweak the model and whether it's too tight so you don't let too many people through. Or it's too loose and you get lots of people going through. But directionally, it's there to help. And from that point on, you can then definitely layer on your human judgment to be able to choose the right candidate from there.
Can I maybe ask just one follow-up question to that? Because it's quite interesting. Would you agree, or not necessarily agree, but my thinking here is that with AI, it feels like it's happening to us. Right? So many people feel like I don't actually have control over, the development. It's moving at the speed of light, et cetera. Whereas you're actually positing that the use cases, which is still quite human, in that if you're a tech recruiter, there's a specific use case around AI across multiple different tools. Is that the kind of tension that we're playing with? It's happening to me and that inspires fear versus actually how can I use this to be more effective, be more efficient?
Yeah, I think there's a general view that, okay, there's AI and it can be used everywhere. But actually, if we break it down and look at the use cases, then we can start to be more intentional about, well, where is the right place to use it? And we may find that actually for particular recruiters, it's not helpful. If you're not necessarily doing high volume recruiting and you're not trying to reduce that list, or even widen it, and you already have a good pool of candidates, then you may not need it. And then therefore, it doesn't need to happen to you. So it's more about considering where are the use cases. And in the same way that, let's say, 10 years ago, automation helped us to tweak those use cases, it's looking at AI and seeing where we can leverage that to in those specific use cases, as opposed to looking at it broadly. Because as soon as you look at it broadly, yeah, absolutely, it feels like, oh my God, I don't even know how to interact with this. But when we get to the nuance, it's actually may not even be valuable to you where you are in your journey.
That's a great segue to my next question. So, AI can help tech recruiters tap into untapped talent. Let's
Yep.
use that as an assumption. And specifically tonight, we want to talk about skills inferencing as a use case. How would you describe this concept of skills inferencing, and when is it most useful in the recruitment process?
Yeah. I guess in layman's terms, skills inferencing is when you can infer skills from a collection of other context around it. So based on patterns that you've noticed in data before. And in reality, we do a lot of this in our heads already. So let's say when we're looking for an engineer who's having worked at a particular company, we assume that they have a certain level of proficiency around a certain level of skills and they've used a certain type of technologies. And therefore we go, okay. And we make that mental leap of this person's worked at Google, they worked for 3 years, these are the technologies they're using, and therefore they might be a good fit for us. So for example, you might say, this is a software engineer, and you might look at words in their resume, and you look at where they've worked, and you might be a small company and Google may not be a good fit for you. So you might actually get rid of that candidate. AI is doing kind of similar thing, where it's taking all that data to understand what are the certain skills that person has based on their job title, as an example, based on the company that they've worked at, based on their seniority level, amongst other things, to infer the right level of skills, as well as how that links to what you're looking for. Yeah.
Gotcha. Can I maybe play that back to you?
Mm.
So these usually are skills that a candidate might not have listed on their resume, right? So it might come out in the interview stage or that screening call, but this isn't
Yes.
necessarily on the CV. Okay, fantastic. When we kind of using AI in that way to kind of infer based on, industries or companies, etc., it might also in itself create some limitations, right?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
can you maybe give us a few examples of what those limitations would be of using AI specifically for skills inferencing?
Yeah, there's actually quite a few, but that's not a reason not to use skills inference in AI, but it's about understanding how much we can use it and how helpful it can be. Let's say, for example, you might have a data set that talks about software engineers from 10 years ago, and you might have a data set that talks about Angular, whereas actually now we're more likely to use React. So uh, the world will change, and the world is changing quickly. So if the data set that is going into training the models isn't up to date, then you've got a problem, and that can be a limitation. So when we're checking whether we want to use a particular piece of AI, then it's worth looking at what is the input data and making sure that's up to date, and making sure that there is a human in the loop to be able to make sure that they are continuously refreshing that as well. Because at the end of the day, your data is only as good as your AI is only good as the data that you put into it. So if you're not going to have a good data set, then you're going to get pretty generic or incorrect skills inferred from it. It can be also pretty hard to identify proficiency levels. So for example, you might get a product manager who has a particular skill, or a salesperson would say negotiation, and then you've got a VP of sales who will also have negotiation. But at that point, the seniority matters as well. So that will then tell you what their proficiency level is. As we spoke about before around the Google example, the same job title can have really different skills specific to the organization. So a product manager in a small startup will be quite different to a product manager in, say, Salesforce. So unless you're tweaking the AI and checking it with human intervention based on what is relevant for you, it can again come back pretty generic or incorrect. And for you, you might not want a load of product managers from Salesforce if you're a small startup, but that's what you'll end up with. So that might be another limitation as well. And the other thing to look at is also that we're not only looking at skills when we are hiring manually. So when we are considering skills inferencing using AI, we should also look at the other data around it. So what's happening in the context of the company, how much the company has grown, for example. So for example, if you're a high growth startup, then getting a product manager from a place that is potentially stagnant and not growing as much, they're not going to have those kind of soft skills that you need for them to be able to adapt and cope with the uncertainty as well. And a little bit of a tangent, but in terms of limitations, I think a limitation also is not necessarily within the AI, but within ourselves as well, because we have an expectation of how the AI should work, and we expect a silver bullet. And that's going to limit our ability to get answers from the AI, because as soon as we see that it's not 100% correct, then we're going to discard it. Whereas if we see it as an assistant or as something that is more directional and is a guide that can save us, let's say, 60% of the time that we're spending on it now, I think it frees us up a lot more to be able to then say, okay, this is helpful. It's limited, but I'm aware of its limitations, and now I can work with that and move forward.
I like that because there's a couple of things in there, and I just want to pause here for a moment. So one of the quickest or quick wins of how to use AI and the potential of AI probably within tech recruitment space is the elimination of sort of the menial tasks, the routine tasks that takes up a lot of time. So I like that, but then also related to your point of it's not a silver bullet. And this is actually a great way to move into my case study here, if we can call it that, which is essentially, actually before I do that, just a reminder to our audience, if you have a question on anything we're discussing here tonight, you can pop it into the questions tab and I will pose it to Jeet as we go on. But onto my little case study. So AI is the product of how it's configured. And you said, there's a human element to it, and we need to constantly tweak it and also take into account the context of the business. But one of the biggest ways that this went wrong was actually in the 2010s. So for those of you who don't know, at Amazon in 2018, they discovered that their AI engine that they had built to surface top talent, regardless of gender, did not like women. Their new system was not rating candidates for software developer jobs and other technical posts in a gender neutral way, which was the aim of the AI engine that they had built. Why that happened? Amazon's AI models were trained to vet applicants by looking at patterns in resumes submitted over a 10-year period. But the problem is that most of those resumes came from men. Which is a reflection, of course, of the male dominance across the tech industry, but it's also a good example of how AI can actually make a problem worse. So to your point, Jeet, of it's, the data that you input there becomes really important. Can you maybe speak to how can companies guard against this type of outcome when tweaking, for example, an applicant tracking system?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably one thing to bear in mind is an applicant tracking system is fairly tailored towards a job specific view. So if you want to be really unbiased, then it's worth looking at how we might layer AI on top of the ATS through another tool that may be more candidate specific. So you can deal with that data as opposed to the job data that the company themselves has created, which may inherently have certain biases in the job description that we're trying to match to as well. So it's really about understanding what data was used to train the AI. As we've spoken before, is it new enough? Does it get refreshed? How much human involvement was there to see if it's representative of the real world, to see if it is being taken into account of whether it's like you said the Amazon case or not, and seeing what data points the AI considers when prioritizing the candidates. So we need to go one level deeper rather than just saying, okay, are we considering gender or not? But let's say, or race or ethnicity. Let's say we're prioritizing candidates who have gone to certain schools. If that school in their entry requirements have biases and typically don't tend to attract a more diverse set of people, and if you are only going for those particular schools, let's say Oxford or Cambridge University, then you're inherently biasing the process. So no matter how much you build a good AI system or how good your AI system is on top of your ATS, if the sources you're looking at have their own biases, and if the places that you're posting the jobs have their own biases, then that's just going to feed through to the AI as well. So in terms of preparing it so that you don't exacerbate the problem, it's actually taking a step back from the AI and seeing, well, where are existing processes and where are the biases in those places, and then only can the AI help you to make it better. If the biases exist, it may make it worse.
Perhaps a follow-up question to that. So if I am a tech recruiter and my main, or maybe I'm a sourcer and my main job is to actually surface candidates, and an ATS is one, job boards is another, marketplaces is another. I'm not necessarily like at the front end of the inputs, the data inputs that goes into the system to kind of surface this. Does this require tech recruiters and say the technical teams within companies working a lot closer together? And have you seen examples of where that works well?
Yeah. So previously at Beamery, this is kind of what we were dogfooding ourselves when we were looking at some of the AI that we were building and seeing how it might be able to help our own recruiters in order to reduce bias and then widen the pool and then narrow the pool when the time is right. I think as a tech recruiter, we're probably at more of an advantage because we are more au fait with what's happening, and we may already have a good relationship with the engineering team. If there are certain questions, particularly around the data, particularly around how the data is used, what data is inputted into it, and what factors are being considered, some of those things is definitely worth talking to the engineering team about. There's a lot of information that we can read online, but yeah, I don't think it necessarily has to be something that is done solo by tech recruiters anymore. Invariably, it's hiring is a team sport, and it does require the engineering team to get involved when necessary. So it's really in their best interest to help figure out what processes are being used, whether that's AI or not. So having that conversation up front is always going to be helpful.
Love that. And I love that hiring is a team sport, and definitely true for tech hiring. Switching gears a little bit to more focus on kind of like the measurement of AI-driven tools. So when companies are looking at, AI, incorporating it, whether it's, putting their feet in the water to actually full on, we want to see what the potential is. How can they measure the effectiveness of AI-driven recruitment tools?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because it's something that we were attempting to crack at Beamery as well. And it kind of goes back to how we think about the value of AI and how it fits into our toolbox to be able to use it. And in reality, we should be looking at the same metrics that we're looking at now to understand how effective our recruitment processes are and how fair they are. Because in reality, the end outcomes that we're looking for are exactly the same. It's just that we're using a different method or an additional method, which is using AI on top of our manual processes. So we still need to look at things like, well, the DI metrics and how they change across the funnel, which is something that should be looked at even prior to AI. And then we can layer on the AI to see if actually it's peaking or not. We can still look at things like time to hire. Ideally, that should go down. We can still look at funnel conversion. Ideally, that should go up. And really looking at a before and after case over time and seeing what the results play out. And then taking pieces of AI out in different places and almost doing A/B testing to understand where it can be most effective versus actually it's incremental and it's going to potentially confuse the process and it's creating more of a black box. So erring on the side of caution and saying, okay, actually we want to have a full understanding versus we want an incremental change is probably going to be the better way to go to avoid any biases. And again, bringing the engineering team there to help you understand. So the metrics stay the same, but it's more about keeping a little bit of a closer eye and then doing an analysis before and after and seeing whether it's worth keeping it or not.
And when it comes to sort of, the analysis post kind of incorporating AI, in your experience, who are usually the internal stakeholders that would be part of that kind of conversation?
Yeah, again, a really, really interesting question because, again, in reality, it shouldn't really change. There may be, of course, input from the legal team now, which they may not have before, because you're changing your process and you've got things like GDPR and California data protection laws to look at. But that stuff should have been handled even before you press the button on whether to use AI or not, and before you start putting in data through the AI, your personal data through the AI. But once that's in place, and again through procurement, IT should have been in part of that conversation. But as you're going through the process, really, it's again the manager, the hiring manager, as well as the recruiter, who's part of that process. Now we've seen candidate hiring processes where we've had to ask for opt-in for us to be able to use certain data processes, including AI. But that's kind of standard practice now with GDPR for European candidates as well. So it shouldn't really change things. If it does change things, it means that you're probably doing something dodgy that you shouldn't. And if you're involving people and you're feeling sketchy about it, then yeah, there's probably something wrong there. But otherwise, it shouldn't really change the process beyond what exists for procurement and legal, and then managers and recruiters getting involved.
Love that. You mentioned bias and AI and helping to reduce bias, especially in sourcing and in recruiting. And that's one of the biggest use cases, right? So in addition to understanding the data that goes into the AI, what steps can companies take to ensure that their use of AI in the hiring process remains fair and transparent and unbiased?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of testing to be done before you start implementing it everywhere. So putting in your own data first of all, and then seeing how that plays back to you. It's looking at those metrics again and seeing if you are getting a difference in, for example, funnel conversion and how your gender splits or your race splits take into account there. It's looking at different departments as well. So, for example, you might see that a particular set of data works really well for the engineering talent, but actually, because let's say sales or customer success may be too broad a data set, it's not specific enough to your company. So, before again blanketly saying that we're going to use AI, it's being quite intentional about it and testing it out in small stages and rolling it out bit by bit, as opposed to being a on and off switch where it's nothing to everything, because that's when the dangers happen, as we've seen from, let's say, Amazon or even in some ways ChatGPT. And I appreciate that we have to get it out there to test it. But when you get loads of people using it at the same time, that's when the problems start to happen rather than trying to roll it out bit by bit.
So coming back to skills and inferencing as a kind of topic for this evening, when you take that into account with the impact of AI, I would imagine that even if it's just inefficiencies and making us better at surfacing talent, it's going to have an impact to some extent on the future of hiring.
Yeah.
If you look at it together, so AI technologies within recruitment and the specific use case around skills inferencing, what do you think the impact of adoption will be in the future?
Yeah, I think we're going to start to look even more inwards. So I think that there's a lot of work that's happening right now in recruitment and using AI as a sourcing tool. But actually, the power will come from seeing what skills we already have within the business and then using that as a way to inform our hiring decisions more carefully. So saying, what skills do we need based on the objectives that we need to hit? And what is the skills that we have in the business at what proficiency levels? Essentially, what are my team shapes? And then what is the gap analysis? And then looking even further into your internal employee base to see, well, where are some opportunities to level people up based on any adjacent skills that may have. And then only once you've done that to then say, all right, let's look externally once we've already developed our talent to see what skills we might need to hire for. So I think we're going to go even further from job descriptions where it's looking at things like years of experience or working at specific companies, or things like that, or even looking at continuous employment without breaks, and then starting to look at specifically skills and the context around it and the nuance around it as well. So I think it'll become a lot more fair in reality. I think it will be more beneficial for employees within the business if used correctly, and it'll make the time to hire drop dramatically if used correctly.
I have a very practical question from Simon Stewart. Just a reminder to everyone in the audience to post your questions in the questions tab. So Simon Stewart wants to know, Jeet, isn't there a risk that we get bias based on who the AI thinks is a potential good hire? I want to say that this is something to do with the data, but I'll leave that to you to answer.
Yeah, so let me just quickly, thanks for the question, Simon. I'm just going to go into the chat tab to have another read of it. So isn't there a risk that we get biased based on who AI thinks is a potential good hire? Yes, you end up creating an echo chamber if you're not careful, which is why the data input is really important. If we think about how we do the hiring right now, the conversation typically goes, I imagine, in most places that, hey, we need someone like, let's say, Simon. Simon's really good. I'd love to get another Simon in the business. How do I do that? And one route is, and something that Beamery started to do as well, is to essentially create an ideal candidate profile. And then you can start to match against that any candidates that match someone who looks like Simon. Now, this is where it becomes really important of what the measures that the AI is using in order to find people who look like Simon. And if the measures that we're using is where you went to school, that's not so good. But if we're looking at the underlying skills specifically, or the competencies and the levels of competencies, if we're looking at the types of experiences that you have had that we've been able to infer. So for example, if you've worked at a fast-growing startup versus a much larger company, that is might be something that, okay, we need to find someone who's more adaptable, who's worked with these specific technologies, and we leave the rest out, which means that in theory, it shouldn't lead to bias. There will always need to be some human judgment. At no point should we ever just let AI completely run the whole process and let them make hiring decisions. As we were saying, it's directional. But yeah, I think if we use the right inputs and if we are keeping that check in place, then there is much less of a chance that we end up in our own echo chamber.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jeet, and thanks, Simon, for the question. A follow-up one from me. So the testing the data, making sure that we know exactly what goes into the input of the AI, and then also evaluating and the analysis that comes after that. Are there specific skills that tech recruiters now will need to learn so that they can navigate this, or is it, to your earlier point, of a partnership between tech and recruitment teams?
Yeah, I think there's a if there's a baseline level of curiosity, I think that will help a lot. I think that goes a long way in being able to understand and just playing with the tools to get yourself familiar. Because the main thing that's going to stop us from using AI in the right way is if we continue to let it be a black box. So whatever it takes for you to not let it be a black box, and as much as you can make it less of a black box, the better. If that means you're doing it yourself, or if it means that you're getting information from the engineering team to be able to support you to understand that. And as I was saying earlier on, it's about erring on the side of caution, and saying, okay, well, this can help, but I don't understand how it works. That's a very dangerous position to be in. So it's not really any new skills necessarily. It's about understanding more conceptually what things go into it and how does it work, and does it make sense of how it's working. If it's not, then there's probably something sketchy happening there.
Love that. And I think I read a piece coming into this year around sort of the skills that will make you agile in a very dynamic, constantly changing world of work. Curiosity was one of it. Creativity was another. Yeah. So it's all of these sorts of implicit skills that will help us get better at using the tech. Another audience question. This one is from Tian, and bear with me. It is a bit of a long one. So Tian asks, how will we see the equivalent of prompt engineering playing out as resume engineering to maximize appeal / scoring according to the AI's implicit rating or matching?
I wish I knew what you meant by prompt engineering versus resume engineering, Tian. So if you could provide any more detail on that, that would be very helpful. But perhaps we can come back to that question.
Yeah, we're happy to come back to it. So going back to sort of the implications of AI for the future of hiring, from a practical perspective, how can companies and specifically talent teams prepare for these changes, and what can they do to set themselves up to win?
Yeah, I think it's really realizing whether it's relevant for you or not, and whether it can help or not. If you're not necessarily doing the high volume hiring, you might not need it in reality. And the idea is that you shouldn't feel that you have to shove in AI just because it's kind of, to our earlier point, it's happening to us. We need to look at where we can actually make improvements in the funnel, and where we can make it more effective. For example, can we make the hiring process any faster? If that is a relevant metric that we want to follow. For example, in the resume review, is that when the gender split changes? Is that somewhere that we can help out? And then looking at what you can automate. Once you figured out what you can automate, then you can look at what we can use AI on. So if you're looking for a tool to ask questions about their data set, for example, make sure that you're asking about the source, the size, where they got it from, how often it's refreshed, all those things that we talked about before, how much human checking is there and how much is involved in that, how it works, what are some of the qualifiers that are used to figure out if someone's a good fit or not. And you can also go one level deeper, and you can start to look at, if you're really curious about it, to our previous question, is how is it actually done? So at Beamery, we started to build out a knowledge graph, which allows us to see, for example, how closely certain skills map to other skills, so that you can start to hire for potential by seeing, okay, how quickly can someone probably get from one skill to another one. We then built out tools to be able to visualize the knowledge graph, so you can make that more explainable. If those things aren't explainable, then it probably means that we are not prepared enough for the changes to come. So again, erring on the side of caution and making things as explainable as possible, and making sure that it is actually relevant for us is going to be the first step, and not trying to get caught in the tailwinds of, oh no, AI is here and we must shove it in.
I love that. And I think the easiest way to make it hit home or make it relatable for our audience is the first point that you made around starting with your metrics, so understanding what can AI have a positive impact on, stuff that you're already working towards. And that second part of like, what is the desired outcome here, right? I think is also quite important. And if you think ahead, 5 to 10 years from now, what do you think that relationship will be between, specifically in tech hiring, the human and the AI enabled tech tool? Whereas now it's like efficiency, saving time, what can be automated, what is up next level?
That's a good question, and I'm interested to see if it will ever go beyond efficiency or automation gains or not. You're already getting people who are starting to use ChatGPT for, let's say, rewriting their resume, and it may become pretty commonplace. So I think really at that point, what's going to happen is we're going to start to see really the above average candidates, because if everyone's using ChatGPT, it's going to come down to the same things that actually we're looking at now. How much are they putting in time to be able to research your company, to be able to tailor it and personalize it to your company? Unless you're someone like Google, where a lot of that information is already fed into the system. But if you're a smaller company, then it's going to go into how much effort they put in, and where is that personalization. So I think it's going to have in the same way that we might use the Google Sheets or a calculator, where everyone is not expected to do mental arithmetic. It's more about using the tools that you have, and then it's more about the creativity that you apply on top of that, and the effort that you put on top of that to tailor and personalize. That's what's going to change it, I think. I also don't think it's going to be AI across all recruitment. I think we're going to get more nuanced about the specific use cases that we end up looking at. So yeah, I think that's where it's going to go. I think the relationship is going to become a little bit more mature, and a little bit more about what more can we get on top of this, as opposed to right now, which is like, oh, whether it's AI or not, I think it's going to be what's the AI plus that we can use to help us to highlight who are the above average humans at that point.
When it comes to industries specifically, we can leave it broad as tech hiring, but are there industries right now that are more sort of suited and set up to make use of use cases like skills inferencing?
Yeah, I think so. Rather than industries, I would probably look at something like where there's high volume hiring versus low volume hiring. When we're talking about skills inferencing to widen the pool initially and then narrow down the pool, if you're doing low volume hiring, then it's probably less relevant. But one of the use cases for some of the Beamery customers was that because they were doing a lot of high volume hiring, let's say, for example, hiring folks that are working in warehouses. For those kind of folks, it's been really, really valuable, because at that point, you're then even more so stepping away from their backgrounds, how much time off they've had between jobs, for any issues that they may have had. And you're purely looking at what are the skills they've acquired over the experiences that they had, and what is the proficiency of those skills. And you're getting a lot of candidates applying for those kind of roles, and recruiters, despite best intentions, aren't really able to provide that best attention to every single one. And what that means is that some good candidates actually will get left behind if you're not using AI. Whereas if you are using AI, at least those good candidates will get surfaced. And the ones that aren't quite ready, the wonderful thing about it is that you can essentially stack rank people's skills, which means that once the role is filled, you still have those, let's say, A- fit candidates who may not have got the role initially, but because it's high volume, that role is going to open up again, which means that you already have a pool of candidates who have been identified. So your time to hire essentially goes to zero, because you've built up that relationship, they've been identified initially, and you just need to wait for the job to open up, and then you can ask them to apply again. So it becomes much more proactive, and I think it's in those situations when it's high volume that's when it's going to be really useful. When it's low volume, there's probably a lot of human personalization that is expected. So you may as well lean on that rather than try and use AI to be able to optimize things there.
Mm. Love that. And I think it's probably a good to return to Tion's question of earlier. So he's added some more context. Jeet, you'll be able to see it in the questions tab. But essentially, he's referring to he's comparing the prompt engineering, where you put in prompts into ChatGPT, for instance, to get desired results, whereas resume engineering is actually trying to game the AI by putting in specific phrases to kind of highlight your skills and stand out. So I guess going back to Tian's question of earlier is, how do you make sure, or how do you see that potentially playing out? And I guess for tech recruiters, are you able, is there a human element to kind of seeing that, because gaming is unique, like manipulating a system is unique. So I guess how do you see that playing out, and how can tech recruiters guard against it?
Yeah, it's super interesting, right? Because we're even seeing in some university applications where they're saying you must not use any AI because we don't have enough. Basically, they're surfacing their insecurities and lack of knowledge because they're not prepared enough to understand it. And I think, yeah, there's going to be a bit of a learning period, and there is going to be some of the more tenacious applicants are probably going to try and game it. But the more au fait we become with it, the more we'll start to realize those things, because it will invariably go towards the median. And after a certain point, we are looking for those really outliers, because what AI is going to help us to do is going to help us look for the ones that we already have information on, whereas that's when the human judgment comes in. So yes, we might be able to game the system, and some of those folks might get through, but that's when we really need to look into it and understand, okay, well, what do these things actually mean? And whether this person actually has those particular skills or not. So again, yes, it's going to be really interesting to see how many of those do get through, and it then comes down to the recruiter's maturity to be able to then test those things. I don't think we've yet got to the point with AI where we allow AI to run the whole recruitment process. It's more about that initial filtering or initial widening up, and then we can start to look at, well, is this person actually qualified? Do they know what they're talking about? And then we can learn from that, and then we can start to retweak our job description or retweak what we're putting out in order to keep that fresh. But yeah, really, really relevant question. I'm interested to see how things do get gamed, and I do expect there will definitely be gaming, but there's no two ways around it rather than just letting it play out and seeing what the answers are.
100%. It's interesting. I read a few weeks ago that a developer had actually built a plugin for, I think it was Chrome. So this is the flip side, right? So we've been talking about sourcing and surfacing talent, but on the other side, when you have developers being reached out by hundreds of recruiters on a monthly basis, and many of these recruiters, the forward-thinking ones, have already started using AI tools to kind of get the best email outreach. And now on the flip side, you have developers building tools to help recognize whether the text has been produced by AI or an actual human. And I think that is the reverse of that gaming, I guess. And we have another question from the audience, from Megan Yates. She's asking, how easy is it to correct data input for buyers? And have you seen any tools that does this well?
Yeah, another great question. It depends how close you are to the data source, if it's something that you've built internally yourself, or if it's something that has been built externally and it's a third-party tool. If it's a third-party tool, that is really hard. And then what we need to check is whether they have human in the loop, and if there are people actively actually making sure that the data is refreshed, and whether you have a connection with them to say, well, how relevant is it to our data set? And in fact, how non-biased is our data set? So I personally have not seen any tools that allow you to do that. There should be bias checks already built into the AI system that you're buying. If there aren't bias checks, again, that's a big red flag. If there aren't data scientists and data engineers who are actively working on it, that's a big red flag. So unfortunately, that's the way to do it. I personally haven't seen any ones that you can kind of plug on top to see whether something is biased or not, and then change it with the data or not, because you need a ton of data to be able to retrain the AI model, which is something that, unless you scrape, let's say you scrape a lot of LinkedIn, which is also illegal, is going to be quite difficult for us to do on the end user side.
Love that. We have time for one or two questions, or actually just one. So if you are in the audience, you can pop that into the chat. Jeet, my final question to you is, so if I am a tech recruiter and It's quite turbulent out there right now. To your point of having a lot of data, you probably have a flood of applicants, from what's happening in the market, and you don't necessarily have the time, right, to tweak your current system. It can be quite overwhelming. If I wanted to take, just dip my feet in the water to kind of navigate what could potentially be a lot of low quality candidates overwhelming the good ones, what would you kind of advise as a tech recruiter or a sourcer to kind of set me up to use AI right now in my current reality?
Yeah, again, a great question, because I don't think we've quite yet hit that moment where AI is as accessible from a recruitment perspective and it's free for us to plug in, let's say with a Chrome extension, to be able to do that. It is still tied into, let's say, a sourcing tool like HiredScore, for example, which is pretty advanced. So if there is a way to get sandboxes from those folks, such as HiredScore, and start to test it yourself, then I think that's a good start to it. The next piece I would recommend is if you're lucky enough to work in a company where there are data scientists, try it out internally. There's a lot of free open source information out there, and you can build your own AI models now with a little bit of technical know-how. So if that's a possibility, then I would say do it yourself and build it in-house, and then it's even more relevant to your specific use case. And it shouldn't take very long. Like, we're seeing AI companies pop out very, very quickly. I was looking at a Y Combinator stat quite recently, and it's jumped from like 3% to 24 or 25% of the new cohort of all AI tools. So there's a lot of open source things out there. So if your curiosity really piques it to go towards that, you can probably do it yourself with some help from a data scientist. So I'd recommend that.
Love that. We have one audience question to take us home. It's from Marissa Milner. What are the best AI recruitment tools on the market at present if I do not have access to the tech to build it myself?
Great question. These are all great questions, by the way. Thank you for putting them through. I'm enjoying them as they come through. I suppose I'm going to give you an answer that you're probably not going to like, which is it depends. It really depends on your use case and what you're intending to do, the level of volume of hiring that you're doing, the geography that you're in, the type of roles that you're hiring for, because different tech tools are going to have different data inputs. Sometimes that is their moat of why you would use them, because they specialize in specific areas or because they have a larger data input than other companies. So it's really tough for me to answer without knowing more about what your specific use case is. But I'm happy to, I don't know if we share emails or whatever else, but I'm happy to follow up with anybody, including yourself. If there are any specific use cases, then I'm more than happy to recommend any that I'm aware of that might be relevant to you.
Fantastic. We will make sure to share that after the event. So Marissa, keep an eye out for our post-event communication. Jeet, before I wrap up, any last thoughts or comments from your side?
No, thank you for having me. I think it's really exciting, and we're still at the tip of things, and it's coming to our fingertips, particularly with things like ChatGPT. So whenever you can, I would encourage folks to play with it and get au fait with it. It's definitely not something to be scared of. I think we've uncovered a lot of things in this conversation, particularly around the gaming of the AI question, which is really interesting. Try and game it to see how far it can go, and at least then you can get more comfortable with how others might be able to do it. And it's only through driving our own curiosity and trying things that we're going to be able to push that further. So yeah, really exciting time. And I think with so much candidate data that's actually out there, it's probably even more exciting for us in HR tech than in other parts of the business, where it's, for example, in sales, you have tools like Gong and whatever else, and they're more mature. In HR tech, it's still a little bit nascent. So it's an exciting time. So you can get ahead of it and try it out now. I would definitely recommend it, because there is data out there. It's just not being leveraged just yet to the specific questions that we might want to ask it.
Anything that's been blowing your mind beyond tech hiring, the use of kind of AI or ChatGPT in general, that you've been quite surprised at the use case?
Yeah, I suppose I'm surprised at how it's not being used more internally within companies. So there's so much wealth of talent, and we started the conversation by looking at, well, how do we unearth hidden talent? And there is so much hidden talent. There's been so much, for example, layoffs in tech, in recruitment specifically, in HR teams, and there's so much hidden talent in the recruitment and HR teams that we could leverage, and we could have identified so that we can then transfer them or put them on projects and make use of those skills. And that hasn't happened. And actually, that could have happened fairly easily by looking at the competencies that map across to other places. And you don't even need that advanced AI to be able to do that, particularly in a smaller company. So that has been surprising, a little bit disappointing, but I think we're on that learning curve. And in a few years' time, I hope that it will become commonplace that we can click more of buttons and be able to surface that hidden talent internally rather than just looking at it externally.
I love that. And that is a great way to end the conversation tonight. So we might revisit this in a few years' time. Jeet, thank you so much for your time. That's folks for us for a wrap for us for the evening, folks. We want to run one final poll to grab your feedback on the evening. So, it should be popping up in your screen momentarily. And yeah, your comments and feedback there would be useful. We've covered a ton of ground this evening discussing AI and practical use cases. But if you have any other questions, please feel free on our event mailer. We'll make sure that there's a space for you to add any follow-up questions. And now I guess to the final order of business, which is to announce the winner of our Zen box and those noise cancelling headphones. And if you are still on the webinar, Julie Lawrence, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, you're walking away with those noise cancelling headphones, and someone from our team will be in touch. And that's it from our side. Finally, a huge thank you to you, Jeet, for joining us, for
Pleasure.
everyone on the call. We hope you find the conversation useful and you have some great takeaways. And we look forward to seeing you next month with Vanessa Roth. Thanks for your time, Jeet, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye. Thank you.